Jazakallah khair. Yeah, exactly. So it's the hadith of Talha bin Ubaidillah أن الرجلين قدم على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وكان جميعا وكان أحدهما أشد اجتهادا من صاحبه فغزا المجتهد منهما فاستشهد. There's two men who are close companions. They become Muslim at the same time. They join each other. They go to the Prophet ﷺ and they accept Islam at the same time. The difference between them, Talha says, is that one of them was a harder worker. He's simply more committed, more religious, more enthusiastic about the opportunities for good. And that is proven in the conclusion of his story, which is he joins the Mujahideen. He goes out on an expedition as commanded by the Prophet ﷺ, and he dies as a martyr. He's a shaheed, which is the highest station of sacrifice and the highest station of good deeds in our deen. So what happens next after he dies a martyr in battle? A year later, his friend dies. The guy who becomes Muslim, who became Muslim with him, but wasn't as hard as a worker. He wasn't as hard of a worker and he wasn't a mujahid. So he dies a year later. Talha sees in a dream, he says, فَرَأَيْتُ فِي مَا يَرَى النَّائِمِ كَأَنِّي عِنْدَ بَابِ الْجَنَّةِ إِذْ أَنَا بِهِمَا وَقَدْ خَرَجَ خَارِجٌ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ فَأَذِنَ لِلَّذِي تُوفِيَ الْآخَرُ مِنْهُمَا. And now I had a dream that I'm in Jannah and I'm standing at its gate. And as I'm standing at the gates of Jannah, someone exits and announces entry for the one who dies second, the one who's not as a hard worker as the first one and who doesn't die as shaheed. He goes to Jannah first. That person enters back into Jannah. A short time later, he exits and admits who? The first guy, the guy who dies as a shaheed and who had died earlier, a year earlier. And then he turns to me and he says, "It is not your time yet." And then he wakes up. So now he's telling the people, this is what I saw in a dream. They're sharing it together. And that reaches the Prophet ﷺ, and the people are amazed. Why are they amazed? Why are they surprised at this story, guys? Yeah, Adam? Because everyone knows it's common knowledge in our deen that the peak of this deen is to put your life and limb and everything you own on the line for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether it's in the face of injustice or oppression, whether it is for the sake of protecting the innocent, or if it is simply standing in the face of oppressive forces that wish to subjugate the world or harm others. All these are objectives for jihad to stand against. And this is why it was legislated. And because it demands all of you to be accomplished, it demands 100%. It was given the highest station, the highest reward, and not everyone can do it. So everyone understands that. These are not foreign concepts in our deen. These aren't things that are scattered. This is a very obvious component of our deen. As many of the scholars have said, that jihad is the sixth pillar. That we all know, we have the 5 pillars of Islam, right? The shahada, the salah, the sawm, the zakah, the hajj. And some scholars have included jihad as the sixth. So it's not foreign information for all the people who are around the Prophet ﷺ that this person should be of a very high status. He says, why does that sound weird to you? Why does it sound weird to you? Why do you find it strange? Didn't this person, he knows why they find it strange. It's because of what you just said, which is the mujahid gets the highest station. But then he's saying, why would it be strange when in the face of that, what does the second person have? A whole other year where he caught Ramadan and worshipped therein, made sujood, recited Quran. And then he said finally at the end, sallallahu alayhi wa فَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا أَبْعَدُ مَا بَيْنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ. The distance between these two men in Jannah, the distance in their rank, in their reward, is like the distance between the heavens and the earth. So the conclusion of this hadith is what? Is that one Ramadan could make the difference for you. One single Ramadan, worshipping in it, fasting in it, being diligent in it, one Ramadan could be the difference in being saved or being doomed. Or the levels of salvation. That somebody could be a much harder worker, could be a superior believer in general in the commitment that they show, the quantity of deeds that you do, but that they do. But then you will catch up or even beat them through one Ramadan. That's the power of a single Ramadan. Right? That's what the hadith is saying. That's what we understand from it. That's what all the scholarship has interpreted it to mean, that one Ramadan is that powerful. So as a Muslim, reading all of this, hearing all of this, what should be my attitude? That every single Ramadan is a golden opportunity that I have to lock in, that I cannot let slip between my fingers, that I can never tap myself on the back and accept mediocre results for, because it's that big of a deal. That's what is at stake. So that forces me, should force me, as a Muslim to now put Ramadan on a hyper-focused lens and say, what can I get out of this? How can I achieve that? How can this Ramadan be the Ramadan? That on the Day of Judgment, I get handed that file that says Ramadan 2025. This is the reason why you made it. This is the reason why you locked in these stations in Jannah. This is the reason why you dusted everyone around you. Wouldn't you want that? That's the attitude that this hadith is telling us to go into Ramadan, because it could be the Ramadan, or should be. Which begs the question, if that's what Ramadan has to offer, let me, again, focus in a hyper-focus on Ramadan and see what it's all about, so I can extract that and actually achieve that as the man that Talha saw in his dream. So that begs the question again, what is Ramadan all about? Ramadan is the month of fill in the blank. Fasting is usually the first answer, and it's usually wrong. It's the month of the Quran. Right? Ramadan is actually the month of the Quran. Don't say Muhammad said we don't fast in Ramadan. That's not what I said. We still do fast. It's part of Ramadan. It's a significant part of Ramadan, but it is not the focal point of Ramadan at all. Fasting is not the focus of Ramadan. Fasting is actually a utility. It's a vehicle. It's a tool to accomplish the goal of Ramadan, which is what? Someone said it here. It's the Quran. The only two verses that mention Ramadan in the whole Quran. Right? Shahru Ramadan in Surah Al-Baqarah directly, the month of Ramadan, alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran, that the Quran was revealed in. This is what makes it special. And then the other verse, inna anzalnahu fi laylatul qadr. We revealed it on Laylatul Qadr, which is in Ramadan. What is it here? It's the Quran. So the focal point is the Quran. In fact, fasting Ramadan was legislated when? It was legislated, Allah revealed it as an obligation in the second year of the Hijrah. So how long has Islam been going thus far? When was Islam revealed at this point in time? How long has the Prophet ﷺ been preaching, Yusuf? No? 15 years. 2 years after the Hijrah, right? And he leaves Mecca after 13 years. So that means for the first 15 Ramadans, no one's fasting. How many Ramadans are left in the Prophet ﷺ's life? People are like, in my life, I don't know. Relax. How many are left in the Prophet ﷺ's life? Like how long? 8 more. So it means the majority of Ramadans that he experienced, there was no fasting. 15 out of 23 years, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ramadan with the Prophet ﷺ, thinking back to it for the Sahaba that were there from day one, it wouldn't be a fasting memory, it would be one of the Quran. That's the primary objective, and that's what it was all about in the very beginning. So, if Ramadan has the ability to change everything, one Ramadan, in terms of my salvation, in terms of the ranks I'll earn in Jannah, and Ramadan is all about the Quran, then the conclusion is, where's the logical people who's still taking their SATs? What's the conclusion here then? The Quran has that transformative power. That it's the Quran that has the ability to change you. That is the Quran that has the ability to push you forward far beyond anything else throughout the whole year and throughout your whole life. It is the Quran that can be the ultimate equalizer between you and someone who has more time or better memory or more money to give to Sadaqah. The Quran has the ability to equalize all of that. Specifically, the Quran in Ramadan is a special power-up. You guys still play video games, right? You don't have to answer. Of course you do. So in games, you know when you're like running sometimes and then there's like a power-up that changes everything, gives you special abilities. It lasts like 30 seconds and Mario's the star. Just nod your head and make me feel better, guys. Some kind of feedback. Thank you. There you go. It's exactly what I was talking about. So the Quran in Ramadan is that power-up. The Quran in Ramadan is that super power-up that can change your entire life, change your trajectory in the hereafter to so much better. And that leads me to a very painful reflection that we got to have, which is now at however years old I am, well, what am I hiding? It's 34 years old, don't care, is how many Ramadans have I passed by? How many Ramadans have you passed by? With this transformative power of the Quran being recited over you, hearing the words, standing in prayer, did it do that for you? If the answer is no, that I have not experienced this epic change. I have not experienced what you're talking about, Muhammad. It hasn't been that grand. The question is, how many more Ramadans will you let go by, and this is your experience with the Quran? That just passes over you like a wave. No transformation, no epic change, no epic stations locked in into Jannah, no effort caught up with, no burst forward in your worldview or your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or your love for Him. How many more Ramadans are you going to let go by and say, well, maybe the next one, maybe the next one? You're hearing this about Ramadan every single year, and we hear it so much to the extent that we just memorize it. That how many people here heard the story of Talha and the dream before? Right, most of us. It's standard Ramadan khutab. And it should be every single year, there should be an extra level of anxiety. Yet another Ramadan has passed me by, I have not experienced this epic change. How many more Ramadans do I have left? Will I see the next one? So, I have to lock in. I have to change my approach to the Quran specifically to be able to achieve this particularly Ramadan goal of transforming through the Quran and getting this epic benefit. The reason why Ramadan passes over and over and I don't change and I don't benefit, I don't grow, I don't lock into these epic benefits that I'm hearing in the hadith, I don't have these life-changing, transformative experiences, is for two reasons. And those two reasons are the why and the how. Why do I read the Quran? What are my objectives when I come to the Quran? When you come to sit down and read Quran, you're going to finish this and you're going to say, okay, I have to start reading Quran from tonight, an added effort, whatever it may be. And you go home and you sit down to read. What is your intention? What do you guys intend when you read the Quran? It's not rhetorical. Yeah, Yusuf. The pleasure of Allah. Okay. Any other takers? Anything else? You guys do read Quran, right? You're down with this whole Islam thing? Sounds good, like a good idea. So you read the Quran for relatability? Okay. Ammar? Just to memorize it? Why? So guidance? Oh, there's people on this side too. Yeah, go ahead. Say it again. Raise your rank in Jannah, so rewards. Anybody else? Go ahead. To learn, so knowledge. Every single time that you sit for the Quran, you have to have a strong why. If you don't have a strong why would you sit there for more than a few minutes? Or even those few minutes, why would they be meaningful? So when we turn to the Quran, we'll get all the whys. The Quran tells us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, why does this book exist? Why am I sending it to you? Why do I want you to read it so frequently? Why is it mandatory to read certain portions of it every single day throughout your life? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us why. So that way when we experience those same whys, we turn to the Quran. But if you don't even know the whys, why was the Quran revealed, then why would you turn to it? Why would you know what to look for, even when you do read it? What are you looking for? What are you searching? How's one verse going to stick out or one story and say, this is what I was looking for, if you don't know what you're looking for in the first place? And the least sufficient intention, the least sufficient why is reward. Sounds contradictory. But if you're just sitting there saying, I want to read because the Quran is reward, and I'm just gaining hasanat, it's too difficult to keep going. It's too difficult to give it lengthy periods of time. There's not enough interaction. There's not enough back and forth for you to simply sit down and say, I'm going to read for an hour. It's not sustainable. But when you bring it with the other whys all together, and you have several to choose from, and you mix and match between them, or try to get all of them at once, now all of a sudden you have a strong incentive to go read Quran. So what are the whys according to the Quran? The first one is knowledge, as you guys said. Knowledge and guidance, clarity. الله الذي خلق سبع سماوات ومن الأرض مثلهن يتنزل الأمر بينهن لتعلموا أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. Allah is the one who has created the seven heavens and from the earth similar, and then He has revealed the command. It descends between them, the command being the Quran, being this revelation, so that you can know who Allah is. You can know that He's able over all things and He has encompassed everything in His knowledge. This book exists primarily so you can get to know your Creator. Who is He? وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. We have revealed for you the book as a clarification for all things. The most important reasons, the most important questions, the most important information that people are trying to uncover all throughout history that's relevant across all time and place is what? Where did we come from? What are we doing here? And where are we going? right? The three main existential questions, and that's what the Quran primarily addresses. So this knowledge. We have over 6,000 verses of the Quran, and maybe a couple of hundred of them are about do's and don'ts, halal and haram, obligations, inheritance, law, and all these other things. The other 5,500 plus are about who Allah is and who He isn't, how He deals with people and how He doesn't, those who pleased Him and those who earned His wrath, right? Names and attributes of Him, the Day of Judgment, the meeting with Him. So this is the majority of the Quran. The second why that the Quran tells us is that it's a formula for success and failure. This is the manual that you need to fare through life correctly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says so many commands. Do this so you can succeed, right? He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, "Urka'u wasjudu wa'budu rabbakum waf'alu al-khayr la'allakum tuflihun." Follow these actions of worship, the ruku', the sujood, the recitation, the remembrance, so that you can be successful. That's why this revelation is coming to you. That these verses are being revealed to you so that you can earn this purity, earn this success, this well-being in this life and the hereafter. Imagine you go to a new job, and that first day, what's the first day of your new job always? Orientation and training, right? They give you the employee handbook. If there's something in the employee handbook that you do not catch on that first day, then you violate thereafter, what happens? You get fired almost immediately. There's almost always a repercussion. Usually, very likely, it's very possible that you'd get fired, right? If you were to get fired and say, I didn't know it, what would they respond? It was in your handbook on the first day, the one that no one reads, right? The orientation that no one pays attention to. So when you buy furniture, right, let me turn to the guys over here. How do you assemble it? Throw the manual in the garbage, right? Tell your wife you got it. And then that's it. At that point, you got to commit to the very end, no matter how long it takes. And then she falls asleep. Then you take out the manual from the garbage, right, from the IKEA booklet. And then you read it, and then you put it together, and you say, I told you I got it. That's exactly how it works. And you guys just stay patient through that whole thing and say you're the man, right? That's how to have a happy marriage, which is exactly what this talk is all about. So these formulas for success and failure are all over the Quran. Do this, don't do that, right? If somebody were to venture through life and say, I never knew, I didn't know this is how I was supposed to spend my wealth, how I was supposed to earn it. I didn't know these relationships were haram. I didn't know that this was the purpose of life. The response is fully valid, right? The manual was there on your shelf collecting dust. You pulled it out when you got married. You pulled it out when you had a business that you were opening and you read some verses. You brought it out when your cousin had some aqiqah and you guys recited there. So you knew it was there. And you knew it had some utility. You saw blessings from it. But then the instructions, the do's and don'ts. Why did you sideline that, right? So that's another reason the Quran is revealed, as it tells us directly. The Prophet ﷺ said the Quran is a source of status. You want to be somebody, you read the Quran and study the Quran and connect to the Quran. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْفَعُ بِهَذَا الْكِتَابَ أَقْوَامًا وَيَضَعُ بِهِ آخَرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lifts some people with this book and debases others. Because of this hadith, Qatada radiallahu anhu, he would say, or rahmahullah, he was from the tabi'een, that nobody sits a single sitting with the Quran, a single gathering where you sit down to listen to it or recite it, except by the end of that gathering, you either rose in status or lost something. Because you're either going to hear something that is going to move you, clean you on the inside, change you, spur you to action, and so you gain status. You gained preference and honor with Allah and reward. Or you're going to hear some of that and ignore it, and then now you've lost something. You've lost status. You've been debased. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the Quran a source of honor for us. We have the hadith, the lengthy hadith, where the man comes, where a woman comes and she is available for marriage, and she presents herself to the Prophet ﷺ. I'm presenting myself, I'm available for marriage. He's not currently marrying anybody, so he turns to his companions, that is anybody looking for marriage, this woman is available. And one of the companions says, me. He says, what do you have of wealth? He says, absolutely nothing. Dirt poor. He says, that's not going to work, right? You have to have something to present as the wedding gift, the mahr. So then they go back and forth. It's a lengthy conversation, or just a couple more details that we don't particularly need. But in the end, he says, I'm basically dirt broke. So then the Prophet ﷺ asks him, what do you have of the Quran? He says, I've memorized this and this. So it's a Baqarah or this or that. So he says, then I marry you off with the Quran. Meaning that is something that could be your mahr, where you teach her the Quran. So it's status, it's honor, right? He got married through it. Don't try it, guys. Let me just put this out there. It's not a to-go-to method that I would recommend here. We're talking about it conceptually. Different time, different people. The Quran is a source of healing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَنَزَّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شُفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. We reveal from the Quran that which is a healing and a mercy for the believers. Can physically heal you, where we recite it with the intention that it will heal my physical ailments. And what's more impressive than that is that it will heal the spiritual ailments. It will give life to my dead heart, right? Something that is more impressive than physically healing a cold or something. So these are the whys. The Quran is telling us, when you open this book, this is what you need to look for. Knowledge of your Creator, knowledge of your origin, knowledge of your purpose why you're here, guidance of how to do that correctly, how to fare through here correctly, knowledge of where you're heading to so you don't be surprised, you don't be caught off guard, you're not blindsided by the terrors and the accountability of the hereafter. It comes with healing because you're going to suffer physically as part of life, and also spiritually you're going to need to cleanse yourself, so it has healing for that. It comes with do's and don'ts because as you traverse through life and traverse through different ages and different cultures and different friends groups and different influences, everyone's going to tell you what to do and what not to do in different categories, in your wealth, in your rituals, in how you speak and how you act and how you dress. And you're going to need something that overrides all of that, that's superior to all of it, that is never wrong, that is never subjective. So the Quran is saying that's what this is here for. Of the most profound reasons why the Quran was revealed is so that you can communicate with your Creator. That you never raise your hand in dua or speak to Him and you feel like there's no response. No, the responses are there. They're specific to you. They're specific to your suffering. They're specific to your questions. You just have to look in. So if I hear all of this, does it sound good to you? Does it sound like something you want to seek in Ramadan? Does it sound like something that is an impressive objective for the month of the Quran? Yes or no? If you say no, I'll just leave. I don't have to do the rest of it. I have stuff to do. It's okay. Who's on board? Raise your hand. I guess maybe it's just dark here. Maybe I just feel sleepy. Or maybe I'm desperate for attention, something. But just entertain me for now, guys. So for me, going through these things, and this is one of like the actually the first talks that I heard when I went to study overseas. It was a random after like Salat last Khatira. And he just went on for like 15 minutes. And I was like, this stuff is gold. So I wrote it all and I plagiarized it. And now I'm passing it off as my own. But hearing all this, and I came to that same conclusion that I shared with you guys a few minutes ago, which is what I've passed by all these years, passed by multiple Ramadans, heard the Quran being recited. My knowledge of the Quran has increased. My knowledge of the language has increased. And I'm still not getting all of this. I'm still not achieving these goals the way that they're being told to me. And so I had a existential crisis. No, I'm kidding. But it did cause me to scramble for something still missing, right? And I wanted to search for more. And that is actually the first step to connecting to the Quran that I found, is that you cannot, and inshallah I'll share 5 of them very quickly and we'll call it a night. You cannot connect to the Quran with like this lackadaisical attitude of, let me see what's here. Let me check this out. Let me see if there's anything to offer. Let me see what I get out of it. You can't say, let me see. There has to be like a strong, desperate desire to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you'll get something a little bit more. And you see this in the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The most beautiful dua that he made about the Quran, that he taught us, that is the dua of distress. That when you're in absolute distress, say this dua. And it is, Allahumma inni abduk, ibnu abdik, ibnu amatik. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm your slave, the son of your slave, the son of your female slave. I'm a slave, my parents are slaves. We're all property of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I acknowledge this relationship and I acknowledge this reality. Nasiyati biyadik. My forehead is in your hands. That was a term that they'd use for animals. When you grab it by the forelock, it goes wherever you take it. When you grab it by this front, the horse or the camel, it's like completely in your control. So much stronger than you, so much faster, but once you do that to it and it's tame, it'll submit. So my forehead, my forelock is in your hands, meaning you say, I do it. I completely conform and I completely submit. Madin fiya hukmuk, your decree is past tense for me. It's going to happen. It's going to occur. I submit and I acknowledge, and I don't ask why, I don't ask how, I don't ask why is this fair. I submit. Whatever you say goes. Adlun fiya qada'uk, and it's fair whatever you decree regarding me. I don't question it and I don't contest it. As'aluka bi kulli ismin huwa lak. I ask you by every name that belongs to you. Sammayta bihi nafsak aw anzaltahu fi kitabak. Either you named yourself with this name, or you revealed it in one of your books. أو علمته أحدا من خلقك, or you taught it to one of your creation. أو استأثرت به في علم الغيب عندك, or you preferred it for yourself in the knowledge of the unseen. No one knows this name but you. I ask you by that name as well. I ask you by the names that you revealed in your book. I ask you by the names that you told us about. I ask you by the names you didn't tell us about. I ask you by the names that the angels know, that the prophets know. That's what the Prophet is saying. I ask you by all the names, not leaving a single name that I'm not pleading and begging and addressing you with. To do what? أن تجعل القرآن ربيع قلبي. Make the Quran the spring of my heart. Spring is the season where things come to life. Spring is the season where like the dark gray and the cold turn into warmth and green and gold. It's where people's emotions change, right? There's seasonal depression. And for some people it's all 4 seasons, which is just depression. But like spring is symbolic of that all shifting, right? We all recognize that. There's an emotional connotation, there's a physical connotation. So he's saying, make the Quran do that to my heart. I want the Quran to have the role of spring in the seasons in my heart. وَنُورُ صَدْرِي, and make it a light inside of my chest. وَجَلَاءَ حُزْنِي, and a dispersal of my distress, my sadness. Make the Quran do all of that. وَذَهَابَ هَمِّي, and to relieve my anxiety. Look at these strong, like he's so desperate. The Quran can do all that. It's not going to do all that if you have no idea that it can. It's not going to do all that even if you know that it can, you don't seek it, and you're not desperate for it. These wordings of the Prophet ﷺ's dua gives a completely different sense than how me and you approach the Quran, for sure. And I'm sure that you feel it, and I'm sure that you know it. You don't open that book with desperation, and neither do I. I don't open it with that same vigor and enthusiasm and the warm tug on my heartstrings the way that I open a text message for somebody that's dear to me, when this communication is from the most dear to me, or should be. So these words show us this strong, sincere desperation to connect to the Quran, and you need to find that within yourself. That we have, for example, the narration of Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, radiyallahu anhu. Ikrimah, the son of Abu Jahl, the worst of the worst. That was narrated about him that they saw him taking a piece of the Mus'haf, right, scrolls of the Quran, and he would rub it on his face like this, and he was crying, and he would say, Kalamu Rabbi, the words of my Lord, the words of my Lord. Like he's just so awed by the fact that Allah is speaking to us through these words. I can't believe it. He's not even reciting, he's just putting on his face. And if that sentence, that narration itself doesn't blow your mind about the power of the Quran, I don't know what else will. That Ikrimah, the son of Abu Jahl, is rubbing the Quran on his face in tears and saying, I can't believe Allah is speaking to me. And you'd need the history of Ikrimah and the history of Abu Jahl to see how profound this moment is. So they desperately want to connect, and they saw it as this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so they reacted accordingly. So that's step number 1, which is have a sincere, desperate desire to connect. Number 2 is to know the meaning. It's very limited benefit. There's still benefit, but it's limited when you recite without knowing what you're saying. That just simply at face value doesn't need to be broken down. How can I reflect? How can I connect when I don't know what I'm saying? When I don't know what this topic is, what this lesson is, what this story is. I haven't checked it out myself, but I heard a lot of good things about 80% of Quranic words. I'm messing up the title, but that's basically what it is. It's a book that has 80% of all the words of the Quran and their meaning. So if you understand 80% of the words, even if you don't know what exactly the sentence is, that's a huge leap forward in connecting to the Quran. Start off with something like this and never settle until you can understand the majority of what you hear, if not all of it. Step number 3 now of connecting with the Quran and achieving these goals, making this Ramadan a transformative one through the Quran, is that quantity produces quality. You have to sit there for lengthy periods of time. You can't expect to give the Quran your spare time, your leftover attention, and to get epic things out of it. It's impossible. There has to be, of course, quality is always better than quantity. Quantity is always second after quality, that's for sure. But quantity is important as well. We have the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Hudayfa ibn Yaman, who said, I joined him in one Ramadan, and he started with Al-Baqarah, and I said he'll make ruku' at 50. Then he kept going, so I said he'd make ruku' at 100. So I said he'll finish Baqarah. Then he finished Baqarah, then he started An-Nisa. So I said he'll finish An-Nisa, then he finished An-Nisa, then he started Ali Imran. And then I had a horrible idea that came into my mind. What is that? I said to leave. I'm done with this, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he's too committed, right? He came in, he didn't join him in the beginning. He just joined him as he was standing. Then now, 75 pages later, he's like, maybe this was a mistake. So then he said, he kept going and then he finished an-Nisa, then he made ruku'. And his ruku' was similar in length to how long he stood. Right? And then he didn't finish these 2 rak'at before Bilal radiallahu anhu came to tell him that Fajr was approaching. So that's a 6 of the Quran in one night. Right? That's hours of recital. We have tons of narrations that we could spend hours going over of how much these people read the Quran. Uthman ibn Affan finishing it in 1 rak'ah. Sounds absurd to me and you because we can't imagine committing to that quantity of time and effort. We have the hadith of so many of the Sahaba and the righteous afterwards, and it gets to insane numbers. Right? Like, for example, about Shafi'i, that he would finish the Quran 60 times in Ramadan, twice per day. He'd have one in the morning and one in each evening. And he would finish the Quran 60 times in one night. Abu Bakr ibn Haddad, he says, I heard this narration about Imam Shafi'i, and it was also narrated about Al-Rabi'ah. So I told myself, 60 is like, how could they do it? So I said, I'm going to try. I'm going to make it my goal now to set it, to see if I can reach these people. And he said, as much as I tried, I couldn't pass 59. So he's like, I hit 59 khatmas. Like, I don't know how this guy did 60. That's his response, right? And it was said about him that his norm throughout the year was 30 a month. He'd do 1 per day anyway, this guy, this scholar of Bakr ibn Haddad. So he's saying, I heard Shafi'i hit 60. I said, let me try it. And I couldn't pass 59. Like, it's impossible. This guy's a robot. But that's like his reaction with, these tens of times. So quantity. That's the point. It's quantity. One of my favorite stories that I bring up at every single opportunity that I get, just because it's power and so many different, it touches so many different categories. Its usability is high. It's a strong story that shows us just the distance between our mindset and their mindsets. Before we talk about the number of deeds, before we talk about number of reciting, finishing the Quran, all that is secondary to the mindset, to this desire, this sincere desire to connect and never settle for mediocre service to our Creator. That's really what set them apart. Don't pay attention to the numbers too much. Because I know a lot of us go home and say 60 times, I don't finish it once, or I'm struggling to finish it once. Forget this. This whole thing's a dud. Don't take the numbers. Take the mindset and the desire to connect and use that to fuel your effort. That is the number one thing that you'll get. Don't say, if I don't hit at least 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 khatmas or even 1, if I don't hit 1, I failed. Push yourself for quantity. That's the whole point of what I was saying, number 3. But with that being said, don't get so hung up on it in its entirety. In any case, the story of Urwa ibn Zubayr, he was traveling from Medina to Damascus and back. And on his way back, and this is towards the end of his life, he was the son of Zubayr ibn Awam. He was born after the Prophet ﷺ died, so he's a tabi'i. And he's on his way back from Damascus. And on his way back, his leg got infected. He got an infection in his leg. So they come to him and they tell him, like, they try to treat him with whatever they have available. And it's getting worse. And they said even though it's getting worse, he could no longer stand on it. The infection is spreading up his calf. He didn't miss a single night of his wird. He would stand on one leg, lean on it, and pray his Qiyamul Layl. And after a few nights, now it's progressing. It's getting worse. So they sat him down and they said, look, it's progressing up your leg. It's going to go to the rest of your body. You're going to die. It's gangrene. We have to cut it. He said, if that's your conclusion, the medical conclusion that we have to cut it, so be it. What can I do? Lose my leg better than I lose my body. I'm going to lose my life. So they told him it's going to be extremely painful, right? There's no anesthetics. There's no anything, right? It's over 1400 years ago. So they said, for you to be able to bear this pain, take a drink of this. It's a little alcohol. It'll let you lose your mind, right? Lose your senses, maybe lose consciousness, so that this can be an easier job. And he said, never will I ingest something, food or drink, that Allah has forbidden. Find another solution. They told him, look, there's no way that you can consciously survive us cutting your leg. You have to be out of your wits. So he says, fine. In kuntum labud, if that's your conclusion, that I have to be out of my wits, فَافْعَلُوا ذَلِكَ وَأَنَا فِي الصَّلَاةِ. Wait till I start praying. فَإِنِّي لَا أَحِسُّ بِذَلِكَ وَلَا أَشْعُرُ بِهِ. I don't feel anything or notice anything when I pray. Go for it. So they waited till he started praying. And then they began to saw his leg. And they said he didn't move or make a sound until he passed out from the blood loss. And then when he woke up, and he was fasting on that day as well. And when he came to now, when he came back into consciousness, they told him, basically the operation was successful, like you'll be okay. And And like they saved his leg, but we had to cut a little bit higher. Couldn't cut off your foot, we had to cut off your leg. This is the part that I forgot. Like we went a little bit higher just because it was going to spread, and like you didn't know how far it was already. So his first response was, when he came to and they told him that, was, "Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala," he looked at it and he said, "You are my witness that I never used it to venture towards anything haram. You are my witness that this leg only ever walked to where pleased you. That's what I used it in." And then he continues now on his way to Medina, and they said when he's entering the city, the only thing that he said was, لَقَدْ لَقِينَا مِن سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. The words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have encountered in this journey of ours, is telling us in the story of Musa, a lot of exhaustion. Even his response was Quran. His only response to this experience was Quran itself. A verse of the Quran which says this travel was tough. But even then, it's just quoting the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People now come back to greet him. And they tell him, bad news. He's coming in with a leg amputated after this long journey. He's old in age. He said, bad news. Your son, your eldest son, entered a stable and a horse kicked him in the head. He died. So we're so sorry to give you this news as you're coming in from travel. So they said his response was, Allahumma innahu kana li atrafun arba'a fa'akhadta wahidan wa abqayta li thalatha. Oh Allah, you gave me 4 limbs. You took 1 away and you left 3 behind. وَكَانَ لِي ابْنَةً سَبْعَةً. And I had 7 sons. You took 1 away and you left behind 6. لَإِنْ وَإِمُ اللَّهِ لَإِنْ أَخَذْتَ لَقَدْ أَبْقَيْتَ وَلَإِنْ ابْتَلَيْتَ لَطَالَمَ عَافَيْتَ. I swear by your name, O Allah, that for all that you take, you give back so much more. And that for all the times that you test, you grant well-being so many times more. I'm okay. I'm completely fine. And then people around started to say, there's no way that these calamities can afflict Urwa except that he's probably a sinner. He has some kind of secret sin. That whole Islamic lifestyle that he led was a front. And then he said some words of poetry that said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that that limb that I lost, like he said before, never walked towards haram. Forget walking towards haram. These eyes never looked at it. These ears never heard it. And this heart and this mind never yearned for it. So I don't know what they're talking about. Why am I saying all this about Urwa ibn Zubayr? Because they say every single night he would recite 1/4 of the Quran. That was his practice. That's what produced this character. That's what transformed him into this superhuman that you're hearing. And I'm sure that many of us are scratching our heads and saying, some of this has to be embellished. We can't believe it because the Quran hasn't done that for us. Because we don't have that relationship with the Quran. So they said about him that he would finish 1/4 of the Quran every single night, except for one night in his life that he missed it. The night that they cut off his leg, because he was passed out. And on the next night that he was conscious, he recited double to make up for it. So the quantity wasn't them looking at it as something extra. They saw this they had this desperate need to connect, and they found it there. And it made them into superhuman beings that when you hear these stories, you don't believe them. They say there has to be some embellishment, something that I'm missing. And that is from the distance that I have with the Quran. It's the strange relationship that I experience with it that makes me doubt it. It's the lackluster effort that I do Ramadan after Ramadan that causes me to denounce the benefit altogether, because that's a lot more comfortable than facing the music, which is, well, music's haram. Facing the nasheed, that is, I have to get my act together and fix my relationship with the Quran. So that was number 3. 1 to 3 quickly, guys. What's number 1? How do I reconnect with the Quran or connect in an epic fashion this Ramadan? What do I do? Have the strong, sincere desire to get these benefits from the Quran that we went over. Number 2, understand the meaning. Number 3, quantity is important. Number 4 is practice what you read. Right? That's very simple. We all know the saying of the tabi'een, where how did they receive the Quran from the people who originally it was revealed upon? Ata ibn Sa'ib, he says, أخذنا القرآن عن قوم أخبرونا أنهم كانوا إذا تعلموا 10 آيات لم يجاوزوهن إلى العشر الآخر حتى يعملوا مما فيهن فكنا نتعلم القرآن والعمل به وسيرث القرآن بعدنا قوم يشربونه شرب الماء لا يجاوز تراقيهم. He says we learned the Quran from the generation that originally it was revealed upon the Sahaba, 10 verses at a time. They learned and memorized 10, then they implemented them before moving on to the next 10. And another narration says 5 by 5. So they didn't aim at quantity insofar as they aimed at quality and implementation. And he said, soon people will inherit this book, inherit the Quran, who will drink it like water, meaning it doesn't pass their throats. It just simply, there's no sifting of the material into their hearts past the barriers. It just passes through, and that's it. It doesn't go into the heart, it just passes through or passes by. So practice what you read. It's very, very simple and straightforward. Doesn't need to be broken down more than that. And lastly, number 5 is kill the distractions. Get rid of the things that will interrupt it. The Quran is described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Kitabun Aziz. It's a mighty book. Mighty in its sense of its power to change and where it's coming from. But another meaning that the scholars have also mentioned of Kitabun Aziz, it's a proud book. It's not something that will do with the leftovers of your time, the leftovers of your attention, the leftovers of your interest. That you give your spare emotion to the Quran. When I have time for you, it's not going to work. As the scholars have mentioned, إِذَا أَعْطَيْتَ الْقُرْآنِ كُلَّكَ أَعْطَاكَ الْقُرْآنِ بَعْضُهُ. If you give the Quran your entirety, it'll give you some of it. If you give the Quran 100%, it'll give you back something. And if you give the Quran some of you, it gives you nothing. You give it 99%, you get nothing. For 100%, you'll get back something. It's a mighty book, it's proud. It is something that you're going to have to choose the prime time, the prime location, the prime commitment and emotional, reserve that you have, and say this belongs to the Quran. You're going to have to put your cell phone aside, turn off the notifications. It doesn't ring while I'm reading the Quran. I don't respond to it. I don't check this really quickly until I get to the end of what I said I'll get to the end to, whether it's a page count or a surah or whatever. It's time for the Quran. Don't give it the leftovers of your time and expect to get epic results. The last thing I want to mention is something that I find fascinating when you look into our tradition, the Quran and the Hadith, the ayat of Allah and the words of His Messenger ﷺ. You very often find that the Quran is not described as a thing. It's not even described as words. It's described as a living object, as a person. The person who recites the Quran, what's he called? Or memorizes it? So Hafiz the Quran, that's like what we get used to now. That's not what it was back then. It's not what you'd find in the Hadith. There's no Hadith that says Hafiz the Quran. So Qari is there, but it was Sahib al-Quran. That's a very common wording you'll find. Sahib al-Quran, the companion of the Quran. It's like it's a person. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا مَثَلُ صَاحِبُ الْقُرْآنِ كَمَثَلِ صَاحِبِ الْإِبْلِ الْمُعَلَّقَةِ إِنْ عَاهَدَ عَلَيْهَا أَمْسَكَهَا وَإِنْ أَطْلَقَهَا ذَهَبَتْ. The companion of the Quran is like the one who owns a tied up camel. Like it's tied up, its legs get tied up when they don't want it to venture away. If he lets it go, it's going to leave. That's the whole point, that why it's tied up. It's a wandering camel. And if he holds on, if he continues diligently with it, he'll hold on to it. And if he lets go, it will disappear. Aisha radiallahu anha, she was asked about the Prophet's character. What did she say? How did she describe him? Yeah. He was a living Quran. كَانَ خُلُقُ الْقُرْآنِ. His manners were the Quran. Then she said, يَغْضَبُ بِغَضَبِهِ وَيَرْضَى بِرِضَاهِ. He gets angry at what makes it angry. And he's satisfied with what it is satisfied with. The Quran gets satisfied and it's satisfied with certain things and angry with certain things. Almost like it's a person. He acted accordingly, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ahmed ibn Tha'laba, he says, سمعت سلم ibn Maymun al-Khawas يقول قلت لنفسي يا نفس اقرأي القرآن كأنك سمعتيه من الله حين تكلم به فجاءت الحلاوة. He's one of the righteous of the earlier generations. He says, I told myself, oh myself, recite the Quran as if you're hearing it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speaking it for the first time. And it was then that I found the sweetness in it. So he didn't look at the Quran as this abstract concept or even as a instruction manual. It's a conversation with Allah. It's a lot more intimate how they looked at it and how we're being told about it. We have, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Quran shafi'un mushaffa' wa mahilun musaddaq. The Quran is an intercessor whose intercession will be accepted. And it is a confirmer of truth. It's like the imagery here is like a court case. Intercessor, someone who comes and intercedes. I know they did wrong. I know they're liable for punishment. But because of this, let them go. That's what intercession is. Sometimes it has nothing to do with them. It's because of who I am, right? That's what it could be. So the Quran will do that and it will be accepted. And then it is a confirmer that confirms the truth. It'll come there and say, no, this person's a reciter. This person's a believer. This is the imagery that's being given of it in an actual court case almost. من جعله أمامه قاده إلى الجنة ومن جعله خلفه ساقه إلى النار. Whoever puts it in front of them, makes it a leader, makes it something that they turn to, they consider, it will lead them to Jannah. And whoever puts it behind them, ignores it, throws it behind their back, it will drive them into the fire. Right? The Quran is going to determine where you go, whether for good or for bad, either way. Again, the imagery of it being like a person. The Prophet ﷺ said, يَجِيءُ الْقُرْآنِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ كَالرَّجُلِ الشَّاحِبِ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ هَلْ تَعْرِفُنِي أَنَا الَّذِي كُنْتُ أُسْهِرُ لَيْلَكَ وَأَظْمَأُ هَوَاجِرَكَ. The Quran will come on the day of judgment in the form of a young man, with a good countenance, a good presentation. It will say to its companion, do you know me? I am the one who used to keep you up at night and thirsty in the day. And then he intercedes on his behalf. The Quran in the shape of a man intercedes on his behalf. The intercession is accepted. The sins are forgiven. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَيُوضُعُ عَلَى رَأْسِهِ تَاجُ الْوَقَارِ, and a special crown is placed on his head, crown of respect and honor and dignity. وَيُكْسَى وَالِدَاهُ حُلَّتَانِ لَا تَقُومُ لَهُمْ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا فِيهَا, and his parents are both given adornments that are superior to the world and everything in it. And he will say, and the parents will say, oh our Lord, why are we being given this? And he'll say, بِتَعْلِيمِ وَلَدَكُمْ الْقُرْآنِ, because of the teaching of the Quran to your child. So all of these hadith show us that the Quran is giving us this imagery like the Quran is a person. And that's the last thing that I want to leave you with is, if you want to reconnect with the Quran, you want to have a strong relationship with it, you want to get so much more, treat it like a person. Not just any person, but like a relative who is perhaps older than you, that you respect, that you love, that you crave their attention, that you crave their approval. On top of that, you're in a very bad situation that they can solve. You're broke and they are rich and they're generous. You're sick and they have the best connections to medicine. You're lost and they have the exact, career path that you need to go through because they went through it all. Imagine it was a relative that had all that going on for them. Would you tell them, let's meet tomorrow and then play them and come late? Or come with your shirt untucked and like there's Cheetos in your beard and or you'd come present, like you're really going to zero in on this gathering, on this connection, on this relationship because you're desperate for what it can offer you emotionally, spiritually, financially. How different would our relationship be with the Quran if we looked at it like that? That I can't come late, I can't miss today because the Quran will be upset at me. Like, have you ever thought of it that way? The Quran will reject me. The next time when I do offer the time, it might snub me, even if I sit there for an hour, because I played it yesterday, because I played it for the last 3 months, because the last time I touched it was Ramadan. If we start thinking like that about the Quran, I guarantee that our relationship will change. And if our relationship changes for the better, I guarantee that we will glean a lot of what we spoke about, or at least begin to experience it in a completely different way that is conducive to our purpose and our relationship with our Creator. At the final end, the Prophet ﷺ told us, Al-Quran hujjatun lak aw alayk. If none of this works, if none of this makes a difference, if none of this is able, if you can't retain any of it and lock into it, it happens. I get it. But at the very least, take home the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The Quran is a evidence. It's a piece of evidence in a courtroom for you or against you. There will be a courtroom on the day of judgment, and the plaintiff is the Quran. It's making the complaint. It's making the case. Is it going to be for you or against you? Just that imagery. If I had to explain my relationship with the Quran in front of Allah, that should be enough to propel you to have a drive to get at least as much of this as possible. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to improve our relationship with the Quran, to renew our enthusiasm regarding it, to forgive our shortcomings and our estranged relationship that we have with His words, and to make this to allow us to reach Ramadan first and foremost, and to make it a blessed season for all of us individually, for our family members, for our community, and for the entire ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Are there any questions, comments, feedback?